Hello and welcome back. My name is Alan. Today we'll be reading more of A Testament of Hope, the writings and speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let's get back into this interview he was having. Considering both the enlightenment and the encouragement which I think many of us received just now from Dr. King's portrayal of the prevalent mood in the black community, we might move on to another complex of questions relating Dr. King to the prevailing mood of the black community, both which also would benefit from some clarification by you. This is what we might call the area of black and Jewish communal relations. What steps have been undertaken and what success has been noted in convincing anti Semitic and anti Israel Negroes such as Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, and McKissick to desist from their anti Israel activity? What effective measures will the collective Negro community take against the vicious anti-Semitism against um, the militants and the rabble rousing of the Browns, Carmichaels, and Powells? Have you have your contributions from Jews fallen off considerably? Do you feel the Jewish community is copping out on the civil rights struggle? What would you say if you were talking to a Negro intellectual, an editor of a national magazine, and were told, as I have been, that he supported the Arabs against Israel because color is all important to this world, in this world. In the editor's opinion, the Arabs are colored Asians and the Israelis are white Europeans. What would you point out? Would you point out that more than half of the Israelis are Asian Jews with the same pigmentation as Arabs, or would you suggest that an American Negro should not form judgments on the basis of color? What seems to you an appropriate or an effective response? Dr. King. Thank you. I'm glad that question came up because I think it is one that must be answered honestly and forthrightly. First, let me say that there is absolutely no anti-Semitism in the black community in the historic sense of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism historically has been based on two false, sick, evil assumptions. One was unfortunately perpetuated even by many Christians. Uh, all too many, as a matter of fact, and that is the notion that the religion of Judaism is anathema. That was the first basis for anti Semitism. In the historic sense. Second, a notion was perpetuated by sick men like Hitler and others that the Jew is innately inferior. Now, in these two senses, there is virtually no anti Semitism in the black community. There is no philosophical anti Semitism or anti Semitism in the sense of the historical evils of anti Semitism that have been with us all too long. I think we also have to say that the anti Semitism which we find in the black community is almost completely an urban northern ghetto phenomenon, virtually non existent in the South. I think this comes into being because the Negro in the ghetto confronts the Jew in two dissimilar roles. On the one hand, he confronts the Jew on the role of being his most consistent, consistent and trusted ally in the struggle for justice in the civil rights movement, probably more than any other ethnic group. The Jewish community has been sympathetic and has stood as an ally to the Negro in his struggle for justice. On the other hand, the Negro confronts the Jew in the ghetto as his landlord in many instances. He confronts the Jew as the owner of the store around the corner where he pays more for what he gets. In Atlanta, for instance, I live in the heart of the ghetto, and it is an actual fact that my wife, in doing her shopping, has to pay more for food than whites have to pay out in Buckhead and Lenox. We've tested it. We have to pay 5 cents and sometimes 10 cents a pound more for almost anything that we get than they have to pay out in Buckhead and Lenox Square, where the rich people of Atlanta live. The fact is that the Jewish storekeeper or landlord is not operating on the basis of Jewish ethics. He is operating simply on the as a marginal businessman. Consequently, the conflicts come into being. I remember when we were working in Chicago 2 years ago, we had numerous rent strikes on the west side. And it was unfortunately true that the persons whom we had to conduct these strikes against were, in most instances, Jewish landlords. Now, sociologically, we came into being that came into being because there was a time when the west side of Chicago was almost a Jewish community. It was a Jewish ghetto, so to speak, and when the Jewish community started moving out into other areas, they still owned the property there, and all of the problems of the landlord came into being. We were living in a slum apartment owned by a Jew in Chicago, along with a number of others, and we had to have a rent strike. We were paying $94 for 4 rundown, shabby rooms, and we would go out on our open housing marches on Gage Park and the other places that we discovered that whites with 5 sanitary, nice new rooms, apartments with 5 rooms out in those areas were paying only $78 a month. We were paying 20% tax. It so often happens that the Negro ends up paying a color tax, and this has happened in instances where Negroes have actually confronted Jews as the landlord or the storekeeper or what have you. And I submit again that the tensions of the irrational statements that have been made are a result of these confrontations. I think the only answer to this is for all people to condemn injustice wherever it exists. We found injustices in the black community. We find that some black people who, when they get into business, if you don't set them straight, can be rascals. And we condemn them. I think when we find examples of exploitation, it must be admitted. That must be done in the Jewish community too. I think our responsibility in the black community is to make it very clear that we must never confuse some with all, and certainly in SCLC we have consistently condemned anti Semitism. We have made it clear that we cannot be the victims of the notion that you deal with one evil in society by substituting another evil. We cannot substitute one tyranny for another, and for the black man to be struggling for justice and then turn around and be anti Semitic is not only a very irrational course, but is a very immoral course. And wherever we have been and wherever there we have seen anti-Semitism, we have condemned it with all our might. We have done it through our literature. We have done it through statements, and I have personally signed, and I think that's about all we can do as an organization to vigorously condemn anti Semitism wherever it exists. Um, on the Middle East crisis, we have had various responses. The response of some of the so called young militants, again, does not represent the position of the vast majority of Negroes. There are some who are color consumed and they see a kind of mystique in being colored, and anything non colored is condemned. We do not follow that course in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and certainly most of the organizations in the civil rights movement do not follow that course. I think it is necessary to say what is basic and what is needed in the Middle East is peace. Peace for Israel is one thing. Peace for the Arab side of that world is another thing. Peace for Israel means security, and we must stand with all of our might to protect its right to exist, its territorial integrity. I see Israel, and never mind saying it, as one of the great outposts of democracy in the world and a marvelous example of what can be done, how desert land almost can be transformed into an oasis of brotherhood and democracy. Peace for Israel means security, and this security must be a reality. On the other hand, we must see that peace for the Arabs means in a real sense of security on another level. Peace for the Arabs means the kind of economic security that they so desperately need. These nations, as you know, are part of that third world hunger of disease, of illiteracy. I think that as long as these conditions exist, there will be tensions. There will be the endless quest to find an scapegoat, to find scapegoats. So there is a need for a Marshall Plan for the Middle East, and we lift those who are at the bottom of the economic ladder and bring them into the mainstream of economic security. This is how we have tried to answer the question and deal with a problem in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and I think that represents the thinking of all of those in the Negro community and the thinking by and large who have been thinking about this issue in the Middle East. Rabbi Gendler, thank you so much, Dr. King. Perhaps we could share now a few questions um, relating to some of the domestic issues of poverty. A couple of them ask about the Kerner report. If the Kerner report recommendations are implemented, it will it make a difference? What is your opinion of the report of the Kerner Commission? Another raises the question of people of good intentions wanting to deal with the slum problems and hardly knowing what to do, feeling that uh, most of the simple tutoring and palliative efforts in the community may not amount to much given the entire contest of the system. It speaks of the power structure, the establishment finding funds for supersonic uh, transports, moon projects, technological development, and uh, technological developments, which are mere luxuries for Vietnam, but not for those pressing needs which affect millions here at home. Can you suggest why the establishment seems to work this way? It is an is it an accident or does it have deeper causes? What seem to you to be the minimum changes needed in the system in order to achieve some greater measure of social justice and equality? And perhaps related to this is the questions of some of the realistic goals of the Poor People's Campaign to be held in Washington beginning April 22nd. So, yeah, I think I will go ahead and end there. We've not got much left, but I'm trying to keep these last few pages short. So, yeah, Dr. King asked by Rabbi Gendler about how he sees the cooperation between the Jewish and black community and uh, the issues of anti-Semitism that do tend to pop up. Which, to be fair, we are seeing some similar issues pop up with Kanye West right now. But yeah, and Dr. King is like, look, we don't push the basic ideas of anti Semitism as they have often been pushed in the past by Hitler and others. You know, we see a need to protect our Jewish brethren. But unfortunately, there are some of them, as well as many as some blacks, especially when you get into the dealings of business owners that tend to try to make a profit. at the expense of the poorer communities, uh, the Jewish and black communities. But I'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, later.